Welcome to the deep dive.
Uh-huh.
If you're joining us today, you're probably exactly like we are.
Oh, definitely.
An ever-curious learner, always on the hunt for those really satisfying aha moments.
Right, the ones that make you look at the world just a little bit differently.
Exactly. And we take a massive stack of information, break it down, and bring you the absolute best insights so you don't have to wade through it all yourself. And today, we have a truly fascinating source on the table.
We really do.
It's an extensive, really thought-provoking training manual. It's titled The Missional Identity Lab.
Yeah, and it completely flips how we view our daily grind. It's a total rewrite of what mission actually means in a modern context.
Right, moving it from this highly orchestrated Sunday event to, well, a Tuesday morning reality.
Precisely. And we'll be impartial here, obviously, just reporting on the theological and historical frameworks the authors present. But I have to say, the paradigm shift they're proposing it's massive.
It is.
It asks some very probing questions about how faith is fundamentally lived out in the modern world.
And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore that exact seismic shift. The manual asks a question right out of the gate that just kind of stops you in your tracks.
No, it really does.
It asks, what if the greatest obstacle to fulfilling the Great Commission isn't cultural opposition?
Right.
What if it isn't a lack of strategy or a lack of funding or better marketing? What if the real obstacle is simply a misplaced identity?
And that is the central thesis we're going to be exploring. The source points out a pretty startling reality about the modern church. For decades now, the text argues, mission has been treated as a department.
Like a line item in a budget.
Exactly. An outreach program, an event on the calendar, or a specialized task strictly reserved for extroverts and trained professionals.
But the argument here is that mission was never meant to be a scheduled activity. Rather, it was always meant to be the natural, unavoidable overflow of who a person fundamentally is.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this because the material points out a really critical tension that has developed over time.
Mm.
According to the text, we have unintentionally created a two-tier system.
A very strict divide.
Yeah. On one side, you have the people who do ministry. The professionals, the pastors, the people with seminary degrees and passports.
And on the other side, you have the people who support ministry.
Right. The folks who sit in the pews, give financially, pray, and maybe awkwardly invite a coworker to an Easter service once a year.
And that divide is entirely artificial, according to the writings of the Apostle Paul.
How so?
Well, the text deconstructs this two-tier system by pointing us to the second epistle to the Corinthians, specifically chapter 5, verses 17 through 20.
Okay.
The sequence of Paul's language there is the key to everything. He doesn't start by handing out a job description or a clipboard.
Right. He starts with identity.
Exactly. First, he declares that a person is a new creation. Then he states that they are reconciled to God. Only after establishing those two massive foundational realities are they given the ministry of reconciliation.
Identity precedes activity.
You nailed it. First, you are a new creation, then you are given the assignment.
I hear that sequence, but I have to play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Doesn't heavily emphasizing identity risk creating a culture of passive believers?
Yeah.
Like people just sitting around on their couches waiting to feel fully reconciled or spiritually ready before they ever actually do anything.
That is a very fair pushback, and the material actually anticipates that. The authors clarify that identity precedes activity, but it never prevents activity.
Okay.
It's about an ontological shift. Now, ontology is just a philosophical word for the nature of being. Think of it like a light bulb. You don't ask a light bulb to do light.
Right. It is light.
Exactly. The manual is saying we need to stop asking people to do mission and realize they are the mission. When you start with the assignment instead of the identity, sharing your faith feels like an external burden. It feels like a performance.
Which brings up that really striking image included in the source material. It paints this beautiful visual of a dark, damp, mossy cave.
I love this metaphor.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Piercing right through a small hole in the roof of this cave is a brilliant, singular beam of sunlight, illuminating a little stream below. It's such a vivid picture of what this actually looks like in practice.
It's a profound metaphor used to explain a concept from the first epistle of Peter, chapter 2.
Right.
In that passage, believers are described as a chosen people and a royal priesthood called out of darkness into marvelous light. The sunlight in that cave illustrates a crucial point about being a witness.
And that cave image completely changes the pressure we put on ourselves. The text points out that the rock and the moss in that cave don't have to somehow manufacture the light.
No, they don't.
They don't have to strain or stress out or try to aggressively shine. They just naturally reflect the light that is hitting them, right there in their ordinary, damp, everyday environment.
A candle doesn't strain to shine. It burns because it has been lit. The text argues that if you are a new creation, your presence in a space alters the environment simply because you are there.
I want you to think about your own life for a second. Have you ever felt like sharing your faith or evangelism is this forced performance? Like you have to put on a specific hat or steer a conversation really unnaturally using a script?
It can feel so contrived.
It really can. And the text argues that when mission is disconnected from your actual identity, it is completely exhausting. It leads to guilt and burnout. But when it's rooted in your identity, it is inevitable.
But it's easy to say that works in a spiritual or theoretical sense. We have to look at the practical application. Does history actually back up this idea that ordinary people naturally reflecting light drive the movement rather than the highly trained professionals?
Here's where it gets really interesting. The manual transitions from theology to historical evidence, specifically looking at the book of Acts, chapter 8.
Yeah.
And it paints a picture that is totally different from how we usually assume massive movements grow. I mean, I've read this historical account before, but the way this text frames it completely disrupted my understanding of it.
The context here is the martyrdom of Stephen. That event triggered a wave of severe, violent persecution against the early church in Jerusalem.
Right.
From an organizational standpoint, you would expect that in a moment of existential crisis, the leadership, the apostles, would be the ones to strategically fan out, establish new outposts, and spearhead the expansion to save the movement.
But they didn't. The text highlights this incredible irony.
Yeah.
The apostles, the named leaders, the guys with the equivalent of the seminary degrees, they stayed behind in Jerusalem.
They stayed put.
Yeah. It was the ordinary, unnamed believers, the refugees whose lives had just been violently upended, who were scattered. And as they scattered, they were the ones who organically carried the message outward into completely new regions.
It is a stunning example of decentralized faithfulness. The early church didn't have a centralized missions committee,
No marketing department?
no demographic studies. The movement advanced because these everyday believers acted as cultural translators. They carried their faith into the ancient marketplaces, into their kitchens, and along the trade routes. Their identity simply traveled with them.
And the manual doesn't just leave this in the ancient Mediterranean world. It brings this history right into the modern day using specific examples.
All right.
It starts by talking about Lydia from the book of Acts, an ancient merchant of purple cloth whose business network and home became the literal infrastructure for the early church in Philippi.
And then it compares her to modern case studies.
Exactly. It gives the example of Aisha, a financial analyst working in a high-pressure corporate environment, and Fatima, an urban school teacher navigating a chaotic public school system.
Let's really look at what those modern examples represent. Aisha and Fatima aren't clergy. They don't have formal ministry titles, and they aren't standing on a stage with a microphone.
No.
But the text argues that their vocations are not distractions from their mission. Their vocations are the very infrastructure of it.
Right. For Aisha, being a new creation in a cutthroat financial firm isn't about leaving religious tracts in the break room. It's about modeling ethical decision-making when there's millions of dollars on the line. It's about how she treats her subordinates when a project fails.
Yes.
And for Fatima, it's modeling incredible patience and grace with a dysregulated kid in a classroom where everyone else has written that kid off.
A financial firm or a public school classroom is just as much a sovereignly assigned mission field as a foreign country. When ordinary professionals begin to see their daily workspaces through that lens, the reach of the message expands exponentially in ways a centralized church program simply cannot replicate.
You just can't hire enough pastors to infiltrate every sector of society.
Exactly. The people are already there.
But of course, as the text acknowledges, there's a huge psychological barrier here. We have to address the imposter syndrome that stops so many people in their tracks before they even start.
That internal monologue.
Yes, the manual highlights these internal monologues that absolutely paralyze ordinary people. Things like, I'm not gifted for this, or I don't know enough theology, or I'm just not a bold person.
It's so common.
When I read that part, I immediately thought of my own life. It is so easy to freeze up in a dinner party when a heavy philosophical or spiritual topic comes up over appetizers, because you think, well, I don't have the academic background for this debate. I should probably just stay quiet so I don't mess it up.
Those internal monologues are universal, and the source text systematically dismantles those myths by pointing back to foundational texts like Acts chapter 1 and the Gospel of John chapter 16.
The heavy lifting is not on your shoulders.
No, the Holy Spirit is the primary agent of mission, not human charisma, and certainly not human intellect or debate skills.
Which takes the pressure of performance entirely out of the equation.
It really does. The text states that it is the Spirit that convicts the heart. The believer is merely cooperating with an unseen reality that is already in motion.
Right.
When you realize that the success of the interaction doesn't depend on your eloquence, your vocabulary, or your persuasive skills, it completely removes that crushing anxiety.
You aren't required to be the savior in the conversation.
Right.
You are simply asked to be the witness.
Beautifully put.
And the story the manual uses to illustrate this is just perfect. It points to the historical account of the healed blind man in John chapter 9. Here's a guy who is thrust into the middle of a massive theological controversy.
Totally unprepared.
Completely.
Yeah.
He didn't have any theological credentials. He hadn't been through a 6-week apologetics training seminar. He was facing down the religious elite of his day, the Pharisees, who were gatekeeping the theology, and he didn't have polished arguments to debate them.
Nope.
When they interrogated him, he essentially just shrugged and said, I don't know about all that. All I know is I was blind, and now I see.
There is profound liberation in that response for anyone feeling unqualified. The manual notes that authentic, lived experience carries significantly more weight than memorized doctrine. God uses ordinary, imperfect, hesitant people.
It's so freeing.
There's this brilliant through line in the material. Calling precedes competence. You do not have to be perfect or have all the answers to be a witness. You just have to be willing to share what you have personally experienced.
So what does this all mean for you? If you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I get the theology, the cave metaphor makes sense, I see the history with the early church, but how do I actually apply this to my life tomorrow morning?
Right, moving from theory to practice.
Exactly. Well, the Missional Identity Lab provides some really concrete, practical tools for transformation. It's about taking this out of the lab and turning it into a lifestyle.
The first practical tool they offer is the Missional Identity Assessment. This involves 3 diagnostic questions designed to help individuals evaluate their everyday engagement.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first question is, can you articulate your relational mission field? In other words, who are the 5 or so specific people you naturally interact with every single week outside of your immediate family?
Like the barista, the guy at the gym, the coworker, 2 desks down.
Precisely. The second question, do you see your workplace, whatever that is, as a sacred space or just a secular place you go to earn a paycheck?
That's a challenging one.
And the third question, how often do you actively pray for gospel conversations in those everyday spaces?
Those questions are incredibly revealing. If you actually sit down and answer them honestly, it shows you exactly where your mindset is.
It does.
And once you assess where you are, the text outlines a framework for writing a personal mission statement. It's about distilling all this abstract theology into a concrete calling for your specific, messy life.
Right.
It suggests writing a 1-paragraph statement that answers 3 things. Who am I in Christ? Where has God placed me? And how will I intentionally embody the message right there?
The manual provides a great example of what this looks like in practice. A statement might read, as a reconciled ambassador of Christ, I live as a priest in my workplace, cultivating relationships marked by integrity and compassion, ready to share the hope that shapes my life.
Now, calling yourself a priest in your workplace might sound a bit intense if you work at a marketing firm or a car dealership.
Yeah, you might get some strange looks.
If I pull out my laptop at a coffee shop and tell the person next to me I'm operating as a priest of the marketing department, yeah, weird looks for sure.
Yeah.
But what the manual is getting at is the function of a priest, right?
Ex-
Standing in the gap, mediating peace, bringing a distinct alternative culture into a cutthroat environment. It sounds a little cheesy to write a personal mission statement until you actually sit down with a blank piece of paper and try to distill your entire purpose into 1 paragraph. There is real friction in doing that.
There is friction, which is why the text strongly emphasizes the power of community. You cannot do this in a vacuum.
Right.
This kind of identity cannot mature in isolation. Peer feedback and shared prayer are absolutely essential to anchor this new mindset.
Because you need that outside perspective.
Exactly. When you share your mission statement with a small group of trusted peers, they can affirm your specific gifts, They can lovingly challenge your blind spots, and they can pray for your specific context.
Whether that's Aisha's financial firm or Fatima's classroom.
Exactly. The manual describes this as creating a vital cycle of affirmation, discernment, and empowerment.
Okay, let's bring this all together. The core journey of this deep dive into the Missional Identity Lab is this. The church today doesn't need more flashy programs. It doesn't need better marketing campaigns or glossier brochures.
No smoke machines required.
Right. It simply needs to remember who it already is. Mission was never supposed to be an event you schedule on your calendar. It is supposed to be the air you breathe. It's an inevitable overflow of your identity as a new creation.
That's the paradigm shift.
And for you listening, the text challenges you to look at your own life differently today. Look at your cubicle, your classroom, your neighborhood. The manual asks you to stop seeing these as just secular, ordinary spaces to endure and start seeing them as your sovereignly assigned mission fields. You don't need a passport or microphone to be on mission. You just need to be exactly where you are, deeply knowing who you are.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with a final thought to mull over. Something the text points toward, but that really deserves its own deeper reflection.
Oh, I love these. Lay it on us.
Throughout history, the most explosive eras of gospel expansion happened when the church had the absolute least amount of institutional power, wealth, and professional clergy.
Like the early church in Acts.
Exactly. So here is the provocative question to consider. What if the modern church's heavy reliance on professional bureaucracy isn't just an inefficient way to spread the message?
Okay.
What if that very reliance is actually the thing suffocating the next great awakening?
Wow. That is a heavy and fascinating question. If we're relying on the professionals, we aren't relying on the decentralized network of ordinary people.
Exactly. It completely shifts where you look for the spark.
That is a fantastic and very challenging thought to leave you with as you explore these concepts on your own. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We absolutely love breaking down these sources with you. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring. We will catch you next time.